Well, friends, we are rolling. And you may be listening to this on your favorite podcast platform through your phone. You may be watching us on YouTube. It only took us 7 years, Liz,
I know. Here
to
we
migrate over to video. And I'm going to tell you, I think this is the 4th episode we've recorded with video. Already regretting it.
My biggest fear is when we were audio only and I needed to sneeze, I could mute myself and then sneeze the 7 times that I will sneeze and then move on with my life. And our friends would be none the wiser. And my fear is that sneeze is coming. It's coming. It's going to be here. And I'm going to mute myself. And you're just going to see my whole body shake 7 times and be like, what is happening over there? Don't worry. She's sneezing.
Yeah.
Here we are, Rebecca.
Coming, and all we can do is lean into it.
Yeah.
So here are the things I dislike about, and Chad, feel free to chime in, but these are the things I dislike about video. Number 1, there is a burden as a female just to fix my face and my hair. And so before I didn't have to do that, and before I didn't care, and now I find myself caring, and I wish I didn't. Second, I know that I am a very expressive person. I am the one editing our video. And one of the things I have noticed about myself is that I am a meme waiting to happen, especially when someone says something like particularly profound. My facial expressions are ridiculous. I look like a bobblehead because I nod with everything. I'm a very active listener. And I'm just waiting to, go on to Twitter, or I guess it's X now someday. And there I am as a meme, and everybody's just laughing at it, and it's coming and it's fine. So here we are.
I hope it comes in this episode. Also, my nail girl, we're great friends. I've been seeing her now for a while. Sure, I have a nail girl. Don't make fun of me.
I don't.
She informed me that my thinking face looks mad all the time. So while you're expressive, I look checked out, when in reality, I'm processing. So I think our friends are just learning who we are on a deeper level now that they can see our faces.
You with your nail girl.
I know.
I have thought this before.
I know.
I don't mean, and
it's okay.
I know you're not disinterested, but your thinking face looks disinterested. It does.
Yeah.
And I feel like, boy, you can read my face probably easier than you can read a book. But, but you are stoic. You have a stoic thinking face.
On a lighter note, she told me that's why no guy's asking me out in the lobby at church on Sunday. So do with that information as you will once you watch my face for a while.
Well, Chad, one of the things I am delighted about with video is that now when I mention your beard,
everyone will know what you're talking about, right?
Friends can see it.
Yeah, it takes up half the screen.
It does, and it's magnificent. I feel like I knew you before you had the beard, because otherwise I wouldn't comment on it so much. But this is what I thought of today. Do you ever smoke a pipe? Because your beard looks like you should be a pipe smoker.
Yes, it definitely has happened. Yeah,
I'm
for
so
sure.
glad to know that.
I've got the whole pipe smoker look. I tell people though that at this point I can't shave it off. Number 1, because it's my trademark, and number 2, I'm an Old Testament guy. I mean, can you really be clean shaven as a guy and be an Old Testament? It just doesn't work.
Not if you're going to preach Moses. You can't. You just can't.
Yeah.
Why
So
should it look like Moses?
We all know
has to
they
go with
had
the job
beards.
description.
Yeah.
Love.
Well, friend, thank you so much for joining us. No matter where you're joining us from, whether it's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're just so glad you're here. So thanks for joining us on this episode of Honestly, Though, where it's all about real talk, real life, real faith. I'm Rebecca Carrell.
And I'm Liz Rodriguez. And joining us today is Chad Bird. He is a scholar in residence at 1517. Do you say it like 2 numbers? Okay.
Yep, that's it.
Sorry about that. Where he brings his deep knowledge of scripture and theology to readers, listeners, and audiences around the world. He holds master's degrees from Concordia Theological Seminary and Hebrew Union College. A prolific author, Chad has written numerous books, including Night Driving, The Christ Key, Unveiling Mercy, Hitchhiking with Prophets, and most recently, Untamed Prayers, a 1517 publishing. He's also the co-host of a popular podcast, 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. A highly sought-after speaker and teacher, Chad combines theological insight with a servant's heart A Texan and avid runner, he and his wife Stacy enjoy traveling together and spending time with their grandchildren. How are you today, Chad?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. We were talking before we hit record that actually the day we're recording this is right right before when the snowmageddon is about to hit Texas. So if you check back with me in 2 days, I might not be doing as well as I am right now. But I'm warm and
So true.
cozy and dry, and I have electricity today, so
Today,
everything's great.
yeah.
Yes.
Outdoor pipes covered and all the things. We're
Yes, all
prepared.
the
Okay.
things. Yes,
Okay.
Guys,
we
y'all,
are.
we don't drip sinks. I live in a place built
Yeah,
for the cold,
you
so
do.
that's what
I
I
know
know.
why. If you want like
No.
the engineering science behind it, you don't. Well, I'm going to give it to you anyway. It's because, I lived in Illinois and Minnesota and Pennsylvania and Colorado and all these places that are equipped for cold weather. Your pipes
Yes.
are about 6 feet underground. Ours are 18 inches underground. So when the ground freezes, our pipes freeze. When the ground, I mean, it's like it doesn't freeze six feet
Yeah.
below. So your pipes don't
We're
ever
doing great
freeze.
up here.
Yeah.
I
You've
might
got the
freeze, but my
infrastructure.
pipes are fine.
Your
Yes.
pipes are fine. Yeah, Liz is supposed to get 1.5 to 3 feet of snow over the weekend. I find myself envying you.
Ugh. You can get on an airplane and sleep in my guest room. I won't be there. I'm going to be at a friend's house because if I'm going to get snowed in, better believe it's going to be with a friend. So here we
I
are.
would hope so. I would hope so. I don't think, Chad, I don't think I worried about anyone more during COVID than I did with Liz because Liz is an extrovert exponential. She's an exponential extrovert. And and she lives by herself. But Liz, how long were you shut up by yourself during COVID? It was alarming.
I legitimately don't know because I blocked it out. Yeah. Yes. I just became really good friends with the walking neighbors and FaceTimed and Zoomed. So it was a long time. And then I moved up here in the middle of that, and Tulsa had already kind of gotten to the other side of the homestead, and up here hadn't in Pennsylvania. So it was kind of like going backwards, but we did it. And hopefully
Yeah.
never again. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Chad, you are a repeat offender of ours. I can't remember how many times you've been with us, but this is 3 or 4. And I want to take just a second and point people and just give you a really hearty endorsement for what you're doing over at 1517.org. Y'all, I said this to Chad off the mic, but your podcast, 40 Minutes in the Old Testament, has been so instrumental in my Bible teaching. You are right there at the top of my list of my go-to scholars for anything and everything Old Testament. And I'll also say this because I've had people find my Leviticus teachings online and comment on them. I took 2 groups of women through the book of Leviticus I think it was last year, and probably had more positive feedback on that than anything I've ever taught. And you were my number 1 resource. I mean, I used a lot of commentaries, but I must have listened to your 40 Minutes in the Old Testament series on Leviticus 3 or 4 times as I was teaching and preparing to teach. So thank you so much for your amazing scholarship.
Yeah, well, thank you. You're very welcome. I love Leviticus, I know, which is a strange book to most people to love. But as we discussed beforehand, I mean, once you get Leviticus, you really do get the entire Bible. It opens
You do.
up so much. So
Yeah.
thankful to pass on those resources to everyone
It's
listening to the podcast.
such an amazing resource. One of the things your book, The Christ Key, it walks through a lot of the bigger stories in the Old Testament, showing how they point to Christ. And I would have to say the entire book of Leviticus points to Christ in ways that are truly astonishing. And once you have what I call a Levitical vocabulary, I really do think the whole Bible kind of falls into place. And the gospel makes so much more sense.
It's a great way to put it too. So many parts of just the Gospels themselves begin to make sense, right? Yeah, the whole categories, clean, unclean, and what purification means, sacrifice, the priesthood. Yeah, you're right. It becomes it's a light that illuminates really the rest of the scriptures once you get Leviticus.
Yeah. Yeah, not to mention the whole book of Hebrews, which is like a Bible study on Leviticus. Well, that is not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is one of the more neglected stories in Genesis. And you've recently done some pretty deep work in Genesis. You are taking people through the Bible in a year. through 15org. And you did actually, I just learned this the other day. You did something really interesting. And this would be a fun episode too, where you held Genesis and Romans up next to each other and walked through them at the same time. And man, I feel like I'm pretty well grounded when it comes to those threads that connect the Old and New Testaments. And I had never put Romans next to Genesis before, and now I'll never read it the same.
Yeah, we're following this Bible the 1 year, we're following the blended plan, and that has us read those two books alongside each other. So sometimes actually being quote unquote forced to read books alongside each other makes you realize how interconnected that they are. I mean, some are obvious, like Leviticus and Hebrews, but other ones maybe not so much. You're like, oh my goodness. Did you realize how many times Paul refers to Leviticus and to Genesis and Romans?
And
it's all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is.
So it's been fun to see those connections.
Yeah. So today we're talking about a story that's really part of the Joseph story. In fact, it's a pretty big interruption, or at least it seems like it's a pretty big interruption to the Joseph story. And I want to put all of my cards on the table because I have some pretty selfish reasons for asking you onto the show. I am writing a book right now with Zondervan called The Mothers of Jesus, where I am going through the 5 women that Matthew mentions in Jesus's genealogy. I'm holding up their stories, and I'm showing how actually these women are the righteous characters in their story. And I might even argue, or at least hypothesize, that I wonder if Jesus had them in mind, or if their stories made an impression on him, because he said, be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. That word wise, your translation might say shrewd, is the Greek word phronimos. And if you read the Greek Old Testament, the word phronimos is used to describe the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And when you look at these women, they are each in a situation where they are going up against a serpent figure. And I think the biblical authors present each one of them as the righteous character in the story. And so I've just had a lot of fun tracing that or pulling that thread, I guess. And you recently wrote something on Facebook that just really resonated with me about the Judah Tamar story. And so I just wanted to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy that we're having it. So my card's on the table here, since you put your cards on the table. I'm writing a book also about it's not about the Joseph story, as I call it, the Joseph and Judah story.
Yes.
So
yes.
which we can get into that too. So being forced to sit down and write word after word after word on a particular narrative or theme really makes you stop. You have to just immerse yourself in these narratives. You got to think through them. You got to be able to enunciate your thoughts in an organized sort of way. And what a great way to think through these narratives. And by doing that, you begin to see things that you didn't see before. So I've really enjoyed doing that. In fact, before we started today, I was working on I think what will be maybe the next to last chapter of the book. So
congratulations.
The end is in sight. It's getting closer.
Okay. I've got 4 chapters to go on mine. So the end is not quite in sight yet, but it's getting there. Sorry, Liz, go ahead.
No, you're good. I mean, we're just all putting cards on the table. So I always, text Rebecca and I'm like, what does today look like? And she sends me all the topics. And I was like, oh, Tamar, yay. Which probably is we're more, I don't think I'm alone. Maybe in the 3 of us on the screen, but with our friends listening, I don't think I'm alone. And I remember we wrote a study here called Woven, the Women of God's Story. And when it came for Tamar, I remember wrestling with who was going to teach it, because I just knew it mattered. And I knew some of our audience might not appreciate us telling it correctly because of how they've heard it. And so I just was why do you, Chad, think women or people in general actually tend to just kind of skip or breeze through, or maybe know the high points, but don't really sink into the depth of this story?
Well, you can't really discount the ick factor. I mean,
that's it.
This podcast is called Honestly, though, right? So honestly, though, there is an ick factor here. I mean, you've got everything from, to use a technical language, coitus interruptus. where a man does not finish the way he naturally is supposed to when he's intimate with a woman. You've got that going on. And then, I mean, most obviously, you've got incest happening. At least that's the perception that we have. We can talk about the details of that. And prostitution. So, I mean, like, what else are we going to have going on in this chapter? You've got, and God takes a couple of guys out. We've got that happening too. So there's a lot in this chapter that, unless you're really at home in the biblical world, makes you just think, what is this doing here? I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff in the Bible. I mean, anyone who's spent much time in the Bible realizes there's a lot of really wild stories in here. But this one like pulls together several strands of the wildness and weaves them into one particular narrative.
Yeah, you're not wrong. So, okay, Chad, help us out. For our friend listening right now who just hasn't been in Genesis, in a while, set the stage for us. Who's Judah? Who's Tamar? Who's Joseph? Where are we and what's going on?
Yeah, so kind of in the big picture of Genesis, you think of the three patriarchs. You got Abraham, his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob. And then Jacob has 12 sons. Okay, one of those 12 sons, in fact, the fourth born of those 12 sons is a guy named Judah. And in the story of Genesis, it kind of takes a turn in Genesis 37. We've heard a lot about Jacob up to this point. And in Genesis 37, beginning there, you begin to hear a whole lot more about Jacob's sons, his 12 sons. And the main character in Genesis 37 is Joseph, who is Jacob's favorite son, because he's the son of his favorite wife. Jacob has, you can call him 4 wives or 2 wives and 2 co-wives. But anyway, he's fathering children with 4 different women. I know, already it's getting weird. But
yeah, already we're in Jerry Springer territory.
We're Jerry Springer territory. Okay, so we got Jacob. He has all these sons, the wives. But now, really, beginning of Genesis 37, we're going to have a focus on 2 of those in particular, Joseph and then Judah. So Joseph, the favorite son, and then Judah, who at this point, really, he's the fourth born son. He's got a good name. He's got a positive name. It's connected with the word for praise. So I call him the praise son. But until later in the story, Judah himself is not very praiseworthy. He's doing some things, as we see in chapter 38, which in fact are quite the opposite. So I like to set this up by saying, from Genesis 37 through the very end of Genesis, really it's a tale of 2 brothers. It's a tale of Joseph and then Judah, and how they compare, how they contrast, how their lives kind of weave back and forth. And then you kind of get to what I think is a surprise ending when you get to the end of Genesis, where it's not Joseph who actually ends up being the head of the family, it's Judah himself. And there's growth that takes place with Judah. I mean, we won't have time to get into that part of the narrative, but that kind of sets the stage for where the story goes. But at this point, Judah just comes out looking pretty bad through this whole narrative.
So one of the things I notice in the story is that, okay, so you've got these brothers. They make these plans to, first they're going to kill Joseph. Then Judah kind of steps in and he's like, oh, no. Why do that? Let's sell him. They're going to get a little money for him. But he's planning, I think, or is it Reuben who's planning to sneak back in and be the hero? It's Reuben, isn't it?
Sneak back and be the hero. Yeah. Judah says, he's our brother. We can't kill him. Let's just sell him as a slave.
Let's just traffic him.
Not as bad.
Exactly. Get a little coin for our efforts. So that happens. They take Joseph's robe. They slaughter a goat, which, by the way, I know you picked up on this. That is sacrificial language. That just struck me. So they kind of sacrifice this goat, drench the coat in the goat's blood, present it to their father, and their father is utterly devastated. In this time period, they embraced mourning and grief in a way that the American culture does not. They would have a designated time of proper public mourning. And then it's not that you stopped being sad. It's just that you moved forward. Jacob's words insinuate that his period of mourning is never going to end. He is going to go down to the grave mourning for his son. I have to think that that is probably one of the things that propelled Judah to leave his family. Talk a little bit about the significance of someone leaving their family in this time period.
Yeah, so there's kind of 2 things happening. One is cultural, or familial, we might say, and the other is literary. That is kind of part of this story. So let me start with just the literary part of it. One of the things that you pick up on when you're tracing the story of Joseph and Judah is that both of them go down. So, in fact, in the Hebrew, Genesis was originally written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew verb for go down, which is yarad, occurs both in reference to Joseph and then to Judah. So, in Joseph's case, we read that he was brought down or like forced to go down into Egypt. In Judah's case, as it opens here in chapter 38, it says it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers. So both of them have this descent. So that's one of those features of the text that connects these two brothers with one another. Now, when you get culturally or familial, this was quite unusual because most of the time at this point, you had clans that they stuck together. I mean, you got to put yourself back in this time frame. We're not familiar with this. Most of us are not familiar with this. We move all the time. I mean, we have to travel hours, if not across states, to see family. It's pretty rare when you have a mom and dad raise, say, a son or sons, and then when they grow up, they just build a house next door and live, within walking distance of their parents. But that would have been the way. That would have been the cultural norm back then, where you grow up, you get married, and your wife becomes part of your family, and you just live in this same area, right, with one another, work together, live together. So for Judah to leave is significant, and we're not told why, but judging from the way the narrative goes, it's pretty hard to escape the conclusion that one of the reasons he left was because of everything that had happened with Joseph. They lied about Joseph. They deceived their father. Jacob was in a terrible place of mourning. Like you said, he said, I'm never going to get over this. I'm going to go down to the grave in mourning. And so Judah just leaves. He doesn't just leave, but kind of insinuates himself within the Canaanite culture. He gets to be friends with the Canaanite. He marries in the Canaanite family. He raises boys that are going to be half Hebrew, half Canaanite. So he's really drifting far from his family roots and going down a path that is not good. So Judah really alone is to blame for the situation that he finds himself in. He chose his path, and he didn't just, set out on it. He went full throttle down this path.
Yeah, he dove head first.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because he's like, in the story, you realize that he has left the family, is in this negative path, and then pretty quickly in 38, excuse me, we get to who Tamar is. And I think one of the ick moments for me is if you don't know culturally what would be true of women, then it kind of feels like she's just getting passed from brother to brother. She's just kind of getting handed down upon kind of that first level, high level reading of the passage. And so could you also give us some historical context? I know that's kind of fast forwarding through the story a bit, but just some historical context as to the role of women at the time and what would have been true of Tamar with where she fits into this Judah who's taken his family down a bad path, I guess you could say.
Yeah, things fast forward in the text pretty quickly. And we're not given, years. Things happen pretty fast. So Judah leaves the family. He gets to know a Canaanite. He marries. They have 3 boys by the names of and then Onan, and then you can pronounce his name, Shelah, however you want to say that, the youngest of the 3. So Judah has 3 sons, and we're told that he took a wife for his oldest. His oldest was named that's E-R, and that her name was Tamar. Okay. So nothing unusual so far. Culturally speaking, it's not unusual whatsoever for a father proactively to seek out a wife for his son. And since was the oldest, it makes most sense, of course, for him to find a wife for his firstborn. So nothing culturally, going on that's that strange, I think, for most people at this point. Now, where it gets strange and a little bit ambiguous is in verse 7. After we're told that her name is Tamar, she marries the firstborn. Then in verse 7 we read, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Period. We're like, okay, we want to know more. It was okay. He was wicked. So were a lot of people in the Old Testament described that way. I mean, but God wasn't like putting them to death left and right. So what happened? And we're just not told. I wish we knew. We just don't know. Did God strike him with a thunderbolt? Did he allow something to happen to him? We have a lot more questions than we have answers at this point. Okay, so
what we do have is and this is my sanctified imagination. We do have, even though it's Genesis and the law has not been given, the law tells us God's heart toward what we would call a capital offense. And so the law does give us categories of what God would instruct to be a capital offense or not. So I wonder in my sanctified imagination if it didn't have something to do with idol worship, temple prostitution, given that Tamar had not had a child yet.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah,
I think that sanctified imagination makes a lot of sense. Yeah. This would not have been a petty offense, in other words.
Right.
Yeah. For this result to happen, the cause had to be substantially wicked, whatever that was. Yeah. And you're right. There is no child, right? So at this point, we don't know how long they were married. Presumably not long if she's not pregnant.
Right.
Because we certainly find out through the course of the narrative that she is able to get pregnant. So that's kind of what we know so far. Now, at this point in the narrative, something strange happens, because strange, at least to most of us, because this doesn't happen in our day and age. Verse 8 tells us that Judah said to Onan, remember that Onan is the middle son. He said to that son, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. This is very strange for most modern men and women to think about, but this was actually very common cross-culturally in the ancient world. Having offspring was very significant, and staying within the clan or the family was also significant. Now, later on in the Bible, when you get to where God actually gives his laws to Israel in books like Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you have what is called Leverant marriage. It comes from the word Levir, which is levir, which in Latin means brother-in-law. So basically, levirate marriage is where, in a woman's situation, if she's married to a brother and that brother dies and she's childless at that point, the next in line brother will take her in as his wife, and the first son that he fathers with her, that son will receive the name and inheritance not of the biological father, but of the deceased father. So in this case, because died and Onan was to take Tamar as his wife, then the first child to be born to Onan and to Tamar would have inherited the name and the inheritance then of the firstborn So that's kind of what's going on here. And this happened. This is part of the Levitical law later on. So, okay, well then that's what will happen, right? Well, no, it's not what happens, because in verse 9 we're told that Onan knew the offspring would not be his. That's what's going on. So biologically his, yes, but legally not his. He's basically a surrogate father for his deceased brother at this point. So what would he do? Well, we're told that whenever he went into his brother's wife, so whenever they were intimate, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord. And so once more, God put him to death also.
One of the things that struck me, that I didn't see this the first few times I read through the story critically, but you just said the word whenever. Like this wasn't a one-time thing. And so I think one of the things that may be missed every now and then is that Tamar, he was using her. He was just using her whenever he wanted, with absolutely no intention of giving her a child. And I don't know that this story makes a whole lot of sense to us until we really understand the importance to a woman, to the whole family, but for a woman to have a child and then particularly a son. So can you tell us sort of contextually the implications of that?
Yeah, having children was I mean, think about how important children are to us today. Most people who get married, they want children, but of course we love our children. They're very highly important to us. And so take our our feelings today and just amplify those a hundredfold to understand how important children were in the ancient world. I mean that was they were a gift of God, and it was understood to be basically the highest calling of women when they got married to have children. This was a blessing from God. It was a command of God, but it was a blessing of God as well. And that's why oftentimes in the Bible you come across women were told that God had closed their womb or they were not able to have children, and it was such a burden for them to bear because it was culturally expected, of course, that you were going to have children. And so the implication often would be if a woman was not able to have children, you know, what's wrong with her? You know,
Right.
has she done something wrong and God has
Shame.
punished her? You have the whole shame culture going on. And so for this husband, the second son of Judah, Onan, for him to basically reduce her to the level of a tool for his own sexual pleasure is to shame her in just about as gross and foundational a way as is possible. He's depriving her of that which gave her meaning and purpose. And so it's
And a
no surprise,
future.
honestly, that in
Hmm.
the future, yes.
Like, I think we forget, like, today, we've got Social Security by no choice of our own. We have Social Security. There is a system in place to take care of, us when we, are unable to take care of ourselves, or when we retire. We have this guaranteed, however big or small it is, this guaranteed stream of income coming in. We have programs like Medicaid. We have programs like food stamps. Well, the retirement program in the Bronze Age, when this story took place, was your children. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned already the importance of family. It was fully expected that the children would take care of their parents. That was not something that was up for debate.
Yeah, which is why in the Old Testament, you will hear a reference often made to how you care for widows and orphans, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so i- if a widow did not have a husband or she didn't have children, then she was extremely vulnerable to all sorts of deprivations and to abuse. And so, yeah, her own future was at stake here. So she's not in a good place at this point. Needless to say, she's twice widowed, and then her second husband just basically used her. And so, what's going to happen to her next? I mean, she's in a very bad place in lots of.
And I think understanding that really impacts your view of the story, like sinking into where she was and like not obviously putting ourselves in it, but thinking through like this isn't just some quick. I mean, sometimes I always like look at scripture and I'm like, man, in 3 verses, you are gonna like change what the court, like this is a pivotal point in scripture, but yet up till now, I mean, we're only on like verse 10 of chapter 37. And so while scripture's moving through it quickly, the weight of the implications of these men's actions, starting with Judah, moving through his two sons, is actually going to ripple affect Tamar. But also, I mean, we're going to hear about this for generations to come as we look through the whole scope of scripture. So, where we find ourselves in our story is that the third son, it appears, isn't quite old enough for the kind of the transition to happen to him. So she's called to wait, and then as she's waiting, she's remaining in the father's house, and then she's supposed to be called back upon. Like what happens as we find ourselves in this portion of her story?
Yeah, so after we read that the second son was also put to death, well, then Judah says to Tamar, his daughter-in-law. I think that's important.
Hmm.
I didn't catch that all actually until today. It didn't have to say. Then Judah said to Tamar, remain a widow. He said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law. So the fact that the text
Fascinating.
includes that explicitly is a reminder to us of Judah's responsibility to her. So he says, basically, go back home, remain a widow in your father's house until Shelah, my son, grows up. Now, that's what he said, but the Bible doesn't often do this. It doesn't often give us the thoughts inside a person's head. But here we have a nice contrast. We're always talking about, oh, that's what they said, but I know what they really think. Well, here we're told explicitly, here's what he said, But here's what he really thought. So he told her, go home until my son grows up. But then he goes on to say, for he feared that he, meaning his youngest son, would die like his brothers. So Tamar remained in her father's house. So the motive becomes very clear here. This is one, again, I have so many questions of these biblical texts that I don't always have the answers to. What did Judah know? I mean, was he aware of what Onan was doing or not doing with her? Was he cognizant of why he lost his first two sons? I mean, you got to think about him too. Here's a dad who's just lost two of his sons. So what's going on inside Judah? We know he's afraid. He's afraid, my goodness, am I going to lose a third son? Could be thinking, well, it's Tamar's fault, right? She's jinxed this whole situation. Has she brought a curse upon my sons? I mean, there's a lot of questions that are racing through his mind as well. But fear becomes a motivating factor to explain why he doesn't do what is going to be described in the rest of the text.
One of the things I think that's fascinating too is that he doesn't just say, go home and live with your father's house, live at your father's house. He says, go home and live as a widow. In other words, you are to remain in a state of mourning. You are to remain in your widow's clothes. You are not allowed to meet someone else. You are not allowed to move forward in your life. And her father didn't have to take her back. Like, there's so many things wrong with, she was legally Judah's responsibility now. She was as good as his daughter in a way, in the eyes of in the eyes of that culture. She was his responsibility now. And he doesn't just say, go home and start over and build a new life. He actually kind of sentences her to this life of sitting in this waiting period with no end in sight. And I cannot imagine what that would have been like to watch everybody else get married and have children and, move through all the milestones, and you are still wearing your widow's clothes.
Yeah. He has forced her to remain in a state of basically perpetual grief.
Yes.
Which is a horrific state to be in.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that are wrong with what's happening here that are prompted by unsubstantiated fears and just this idea it's all about, I think with Judah, it's all about self-protection. He's at this point. So when I'm thinking the big picture here about Judah and what happens to him later in the stories, at this point, Judah's all about Judah. He's got his little circle. That's all he really cares about. He's not thinking long term. He's not thinking big picture. He's just thinking self-protection. So selfishness is definitely his guiding force at this point, which is one of the beautiful things about what happens later in his story, which I know we're not talking about. But if you read the rest of Genesis and you get to later in Judah's life, and he actually pledges his own life for the sake of his brother Benjamin, which you can read about later in Genesis, then you're like, oh, God's been at work on Judah.
Yeah, one of the things I say is that Judah goes from the serpent character to the Christ character. I mean, he really does. He has a total transformation. And I believe, and I'm totally willing to be wrong about this, but I believe that Tamar has a lot to do with that. So let's talk about what she does that has troubled so many people for so long. We've established the context, so we can see the gravity of her situation. Tamar is a desperate woman, and she also has a legal right to a child. She has a legal right to offspring through the Leverant marriage system. And in surrounding cultures, not in Israel, but surrounding cultures, the Leverant marriage law actually included the father-in-law. So he would have been a viable candidate to give her a child. And so she does something really interesting. She takes off her widow's clothes and she puts on a veil. And because I just have a little working theory, I want to call attention to the veil. And Chad, as an Old Testament scholar, I know you know this. The last time we saw veil in scripture, it was connected to a bride. And in my research, I found that not only did prostitutes not wear veils, they were forbidden by law to wear veils. Only betrothed women wore veils. And so I know a lot of people think that she hatched up this evil scheme to seduce Judah. Did she, or is there a chance that she went to remind her father-in-law that she was betrothed to his son and then took advantage of an opportunity when he solicited her? We can't know, but I think it's a good hypothesis.
That is a very good hypothesis, and you're totally accurate about the veil part. Yeah, you wore a veil if you were married. That's why when Rebecca's being brought home to Isaac, and she's told by the servant, "That's your future husband coming," she veils herself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so certainly the veil, as far as the narrative itself goes, serves as a powerful reminder that she is not just a widow, she's supposed to be already wed to that youngest son and is not. So the function of the veil here is quite profound.
Chad just said my hypothesis was good. Can we take a moment and just pause and note that Chad Bird just said my hypothesis? Okay, all I needed was a moment. I've had my moment. Now we can continue.
Yeah, another, and maybe you said this, maybe I just didn't catch it. Another feature I think to keep in mind here too is that, so in this encounter they're about to have, Judah has been recently become a widower himself.
Yes.
Yeah. Where verse 12 says, in the course of time. Now I wish we knew how long that was, but anyway, some time's passed, and Judah's wife dies. And so he goes to see his friends, and Tamar hears that he's coming to shear some sheep. And so that's when she does what she does. She takes off her widow's garment. So like you were talking about earlier, it was pretty customary for, if you're in the period of mourning, you wear a certain garb. I mean, that was still in place up until probably the 8th, even in some cultures, right? So she covered herself with a veil, and then she sat at the entrance of this place called Enayim, which, by the way, Enayim is from the Hebrew for eyes, which is just kind of beautiful, because if you veil, what do you see?
Right.
Eyes.
Right.
And the seeing here is part of the story too. You know, she saw this happening. Judah sees her, but he doesn't really see her because all they can see are the eyes, and she's at a place called eyes. So there's so many different things that are happening here. But anyway, she does this because she saw that Shelah had grown up and nothing's happening, right? Not given to him in marriage. And so Judah sees her, thought that she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. And he comes up basically, and he's like a John who's propositions her. So he says, he's pretty straightforward. When Hebrew describes intercourse, it just kind of says it factually. He says, he comes up to her and says, "Come, let me come into you." I mean, it's just like kind of straightforward. And then they begin to have a conversation after that.
There is no, "How you doing?" There's just none of that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So y'all can pick it up from there. Go ahead.
Well, I think one of the misconceptions that I heard when we were in the thick of this passage isn't maybe a misconception, but is the question of like, were her actions holy or not? Was the preemptive nature of seeing all these things happening around her? I heard often, like, it kind of feels like she's taking it into her own hands and trying to like solve the problem. And so would love kind of your insight and your take on, like, is this a misconception we have of her? Is it like a mystery we might not know until one day we're like hanging out with them in heaven? Or what can we kind of surmise from what the text tells us as a whole?
Yeah, that's great. And I would love to hear both of you reflect on that, because honestly, I go back and forth. So here is kind of my approach to that. And I think this is a significant omission, like a purposeful omission. There is never any negative language used in reference to what she did. So never is there any kind of negative judgment that is spoken concerning what she did. Nothing. Now, as the story unfolds at the very end, Judah will say, "She is more righteous than I," which I always think is quite the understatement. Not a very high bar to reach when it comes to being more righteous than Judah in this case. But yeah, I mean, think of it this way. Was she entitled legally, culturally and legally, to have a child with a member of that family? Let's put it that way. Yes, absolutely. Just like you pointed out, Rebecca. And I was just reading an article this morning from an academic journal, which was talking about the Assyrian laws, which said that, and maybe that's the same one that you're referring to, that at least in Assyria, around the same time period, that if for some reason a brother was unable, because of the absence of a brother or death or whatever, if a brother was unable to perform the Leverant obligation for the widow, then that obligation fell on the father-in-law, which makes actually perfect sense because she has been brought into the family. Now, in ordinary circumstances, of course, if a daughter-in-law is still married and the father-in-law sleeps with the daughter-in-law, that is against the law. But if she's a widow and she's supposed to have a child with this family, then it would be the responsibility, at least in the Assyrian culture, for the father-in-law to do that. And so, at least if you're thinking parallels in culture, then there's a high likelihood that's the case here too.
You know, I think we really, really, really want God to be black and white all the time. And Jesus said, "Be as shrewd as serpents, yet as innocent as doves." What he is essentially saying, and when you talked about wisdom, because that it could be translated as wise, be as wise as serpents, as innocent as doves. Two thoughts on wisdom. One was Sophia, where we get our name Sophia, which meant wisdom. And there were the sophists, who were the academics, the elite, the enlightened, the philosophers. And they had what we would consider learned wisdom in a textbook sense. They had given deep thought to all the deep thinkers. Phronimos, I think we could kind of categorize that as street smarts. It talks about knowing the right thing to do in a given situation. And the right thing to do in one situation may not be the right thing to do in another situation. Pardon me, who even gets to decide that? So I think we look at the Judah Tamar story and we want it to be black and white, and it's just not. We don't live in this time period. We don't understand the desperation she would have felt, the legal obligation she would have had to bear children, to carry on her dead husband's name. A name is not worth much anymore today. A name was everything in the ancient culture. And so what we do know, I mean, did she do the right thing? Well, I don't know if we can answer that. What we can answer is that the rabbis looked upon her favorably. They thought she did. Judah said she is more righteous than I. David named his daughter after her. That is huge, that the most notable king of ancient Israel would name his daughter after her. His son named his daughter after her. So I think that that's as close to an answer as we're going to get, is that the biblical authors held her up as the righteous figure in the story.
I love that you called her street smart, because I think it's one of those stories that you read where you're like, I don't know what I would do. And I also pray that I'm never in a circumstance where I'm having to think about doing the things that Tamar is having to do. But the thing that both of you've mentioned and alluded to that you didn't address right there is that she also is mentioned in Matthew in the genealogy of Jesus, which there's not very many women mentioned there. And the ones that are, when you go back and read their stories, it's this beautiful example of God's love and for God's love for women that you see in there too. And so I think that tension point I recently in a lesson was just like, there are some tensions that the Bible does not seek to clarify. And so therefore, we have to live in the tension that it sets before us. And I think the Judah Tamar story is one of those tension points where you're like, have to hold it for what scripture tells us that it is. And it is part of Judah's sanctifying journey. I don't think you can look at the story and not think that the Tamar encounter wasn't kind of one of the changing points for him as he was going from that self-centered to self-sacrificing journey. And I think that is so important, but we can get hung up on this Tamar moment and miss some of the bigger things that are happening in this encounter in his life, which I just think is crucial for us to kind of zoom out a little bit.
Totally.
To see it.
Yes, I love that you said that too. We get hung up on this one aspect of the story that I don't know that we're supposed to get stuck there. I don't think we're supposed to try and pull apart every fiber of every thread in that story like we want to. And Chad, I would love to hear your thoughts about this, because I know you picked up on this. So Judah, when he wants to sleep with her, offers to pay her a price. She says, "What will you give me?" He says, "I'll give you a goat," but he doesn't have a goat with him. So she asks for some kind of down payment, some kind of security in exchange for the future goat he's going to bring her. And she's smart as a whip here. She asks for the 3 things that would identify him: his cord, his seal, and what's the third?
His signet.
Signet ring. Yeah. So essentially, I mean, to use a tired old analogy, she said, "Yep, just hand over your driver's license, your credit card, and your birth
Social
certificate."
security number.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when Judah finds out, she becomes pregnant. Judah finds out. She gets dragged out to the public square. She's about to be burned, which is like, you never desecrate bodies in that time period. So that was such overkill on capital punishment. She says, "Please examine these," something like that, "to see who they belong to," which are the exact same words that Judah and his brothers said to Jacob when they had him examine the coat. And I have to think, I don't know, and the text doesn't say, but I have to think that when he heard those words, the past few decades came rushing back on him like a tidal wave. And he knew that he was out of God's will.
Yeah, I fully agree. That's one of the it's one of the beautiful connections between what's happening here and what happened earlier, because they brought that bloody coat of many colors and said, "Please identify this," right? "Is this your brothers?" And that was Judah engaging in that act of deception. And here you have Tamar saying, "Please identify." And in Hebrew, it's the same verb that's used in both cases. "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Yeah, I think it was an epiphany moment for Judah. He's like, everything comes back to him, right? He remembers what he did to his father. He realizes what she has done, realizes what he has done in this situation. And he rightly confesses, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son, Shelah." And he did not know her again. So yeah, I think for Judah, this was huge. This was a moment where this was just a teaching moment by Professor Tamar. Judah was entirely her pupil in this moment. She was teaching him, you are self-centered. You've acted shamefully. You have mistreated me. You have used me. You have made my life horrible. And I acted shrewdly. I did what was right. And Judah realizes in that moment, in fact, that she did the right thing and that he did the wrong thing. And that was the beginning, I think, for him of moving away from being such a navel gazer to looking outward and thinking about the bigger picture and other people, and not just about what he wanted in his selfish sort of way. And so that seed really planted in his life by Tamar's actions is going to bear fruit much later on as you go through the rest of the Judah narrative.
So good. I can't wait for your book to come out. When does your book come out?
I'll finish it in a month or so. It probably won't be out till next year.
Okay.
Like 2027.
Well, we'll either re-release
We'll see you
this
then.
episode yeah, exactly. We'll have you on, or we'll re-release this episode. I'd prefer to have you back on. Okay, so let's back up and answer the so what question. What are we supposed to do with this weird narrative? And Chad, I'm not kidding. I might have said this to you in an email when we were going back and forth about scheduling this podcast, but I was in a bookstore not too long ago. I was in Half Price Books. And I always just look for old Christian books. I like to read them. I like to decorate with them. And I found this old commentary that I'd never heard of, and it was on the first 5 books of the Bible. And because I'm researching for Tamar right now, or I was at the time, I picked it up and flipped right to that section. I kid you not, this author skipped chapter 38 in the commentary. I'm totally serious.
My goodness gracious.
Skipped it. This is a scholar. Skipped it. And it was released in the 50s, and I know things were different, 70 years ago, but still skipped it.
That is so bizarre. Yeah. It reminds me of, I was in a a gathering one time, and our chaplain was taking us through Psalm 139, which has, which most of which is beautiful, talks about God's formedness in the
I
womb.
know
But
where
it
you're
does have
going.
about 4 verses where all of a sudden you have this hard shift. And he's like, do I not hate those who hate thee, O Lord? Do I not loathe those who rise up against thee? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They become my enemies. Well, the chaplain's reading through these verses just very meditatively. And then without taking a breath, he skips right over those verses and picks it up where it goes
Wow.
back to the general tenor of the psalm again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what you saw in that book, what I experienced, is so typical of how people skip the uncomfortable parts of the Bible instead of pausing and saying, evidently God wanted this here. So he's teaching us something. What can we learn? How does this fit in the bigger picture of Scripture? And when you begin to ask those kind of questions, you get to answers just like we've gotten to here. Well, you trace it all the way to Matthew 1. All of a sudden, she's in the genealogy of Jesus. Thanks be to God,
No.
So
precious.
yeah.
And have you ever paused on this? God gave her twins.
Yes.
One son for each husband. How amazing is God?
Yeah. Always giving us more than we could ever imagine.
Yep. Well, Chad, I know you know how we do this, and I want to be mindful of your time. We end every show with last words. And I would just love to ask you what you want to leave our audience, our friend listening with right now. What kind of comfort can they rest in knowing that God chose to include this story in Scripture?
Yeah, I think my takeaway from chapters like this is almost always the same, that we are not writing our own story, but we are part of God's bigger story. And when I look at my life now and in so many times, I'm like, God, what a mess. Even God can't bring something good out of this. And yet he always does, and he always has. And so it's very easy for us to see ourselves in Genesis 38 kind of situations, whatever those might be. Like, where's God? What's he doing? Well, he's doing something, and he's there because he's the kind of God who knows you, knows your family, knows your struggles, and you are part of the ongoing story that God himself is putting pen to paper to write. So know that God brings good out of the worst of situations, and that good ultimately is anchored in Christ himself. And as we just talked about, here we have Judah and Tamar and their sons ending up right there in the family tree of Jesus, the same family tree that we're part of because we're part of the body of Christ. So that would be my takeaway.
I love it. Liz, what about you?
I think for me, my takeaway is not to shy away from passages that, as we've said a few times on here, that maybe give you the ick or are uncomfortable or making you question the character of God, or why maybe behind some of these passages. I think there's something really sweet about leaning in and learning from those who maybe know more about the cultural context or more about what's going on here, so that you can get to the other side. I mean, I know for me, Tamar was one where you're like, "Oh, it's in there, and I guess we have to include her if we're doing 12 weeks of women, here we go." But then as you learn about her, you're like, "Oh, that we might learn and have the courage." And who knows if that's what we'd be called to do in a situation similar, but I think there is something valuable about her actions that Scripture highlights for us. And we do see God's nature and care as you get to the end of the story and see him doing exceedingly abundantly more than maybe what we thought was going to happen at the front end of it. And so I would just say the passages like this one or other ones where maybe you want to do what the commentator or the pastor did and be like, and on to the next. I would say actually take some time and lean in and see what God has for us in those passages too.
I think I would just say, what if you are potentially in a season of waiting and it feels like nothing's happening, and maybe you feel like Tamar, you're just sort of trapped in this season that you don't want to be a part of, that you didn't put yourself in, that you didn't ask for, and you feel as though God has gone silent. I would encourage you that just because it feels like God isn't speaking does not mean he's not working. And when we want to hear him speak, we need go no further than the scriptures and read stories like this and remember that just like in a production, a stage production, during intermission, it seems like nothing is happening. But behind that curtain, man, things are being moved into place. There is a director who is giving orders, and everything is under control, and everything is going exactly as it's supposed to be. And God knows where you are. He knows what you're going through, and he is already at that exact second when this season's going to end. And you can be encouraged knowing that he sees you, he loves you, and he is still writing your story. So, yeah. Chad, I'm not going to lie. You're one of my favorite repeat offenders. You are one of my favorites.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. And thank you both for all your insights. I'm going to have to go back to the chapter I wrote on this and reread it. Make sure, I guarantee you there will be some editing just on the basis of all the insights that you both had. So thank you.
Well,
I'll put your names in a footnote. How's that?
Oh, man. Well, listen, thank you.
Yes.
For your scholarship and for being so authentic and so real and so readily available to just so quick to give your scholarship away. You're doing so much more good than you can see.
Yeah,
and we appreciate it.
Yeah. Glad to do it. Thank you all again.
Thank you, friends, for listening to this episode. I hope this conversation was encouraging. So be sure to share it, like it, subscribe if you haven't done that as well. And also, none of us sneezed. All of us looked real cute. I think I only made a few serious faces. So if you missed it all, please be sure to head to YouTube. We'd love for you to watch us over there. And as always, thank you, Taylor and Caitlin, for making us look and sound good. We appreciate y'all on this show as well. Thank y'all.
Yes, we do. And friend, if no one has told you yet today that they love you, we do. But far more importantly than that, the God who is writing Tamar's story, or who wrote Tamar's story and is writing yours, is absolutely crazy about you. Peace.
Peace.